How does a city more advanced than its time vanish into silence? The silence of forgotten civilizations often lingers louder than the noise of those that survive. In the wetlands of the Yangtze River, where mist coils over canals and the earth hides its secrets, lies the story of a city that should not have existed in its time. A city of jade and water, of towering walls and engineered dams. A city that appeared 5,000 years ago and then disappeared, leaving behind questions that still haunt archaeologists today. This is the mystery of Liangzhu, China's first great city, a place more advanced than its age, yet swallowed by floods and silence. But what truly happened here? And why does its legacy echo across dynasties long after its fall? When we speak of ancient China, minds often leap to the Shang dynasty with its bronze vessels, or the Zhou with its mandalas of power. Yet Liangzhu existed long before either. While Egypt was still learning to shape stone and Mesopotamia carved its first cities into clay, Liangzhu rose in the wetlands, building a metropolis unlike anything else on Earth. What makes it more mysterious is not just its existence, but its sudden disappearance. Around 2300 BCE, its grand walls, palaces, and waterways fell silent. The people scattered, the rulers vanished. And though later dynasties remembered symbols, artifacts, and Jade traditions, the city itself was erased from memory, until archaeologists uncovered it in the 20th century. But this is not a story of ruins alone. It is a story of questions. Who were the rulers of Liangzhu? How did they organize tens of thousands to carve canals, raise dams, and transport jade from mountains hundreds of miles away? Why did they bury their elites with artifacts carved with symbols that may have been the first whispers of writing? And most importantly, why did this flourishing city collapse so suddenly? Some say it was the wrath of floods. Others whisper it was a failure of its own magnificent dams. And some suggest that what destroyed Liangzhu was not simply nature, but something far more complex, a shift in power, in climate, in destiny. As we journey through Liangzhu's story, we will step into its canals, walk the terraces of its rulers, and enter the tombs where jade still glimmers after 5 millennia. We will trace its rise as an unlikely capital of the Neolithic world, and its mysterious fall into silence. Liangzhu is not just an archaeological site. It is a riddle carved in jade, buried in earth, and whispered through time. And tonight, we open that riddle. What makes Liangzhu more than a footnote in history is its sheer audacity. At a time when most communities in the world still lived in small farming villages, Liangzhu had already mastered the idea of the city as an engine of power. Archaeologists estimate that more than 30,000 people lived within its walls, while thousands more farmed, fished, and quarried stone in the surrounding wetlands. This was not just a settlement. It was an organized society with leaders, laborers, engineers, and priests. The city's most striking achievement was its water system. Hidden beneath layers of mud, archaeologists uncovered an intricate network of dams, levees, and canals stretching for miles. These were not crude barriers. They were carefully designed hydraulic works, capable of controlling seasonal floods and storing water for agriculture. Liangzhu's people had turned the chaos of nature into order, centuries before other civilizations would attempt the same. And yet, water was also their greatest vulnerability. The wetlands gave life, but they also carried destruction. Historians now believe that massive floods, perhaps triggered by climate shifts, could have overwhelmed even Liangzhu's mighty dams. But if floods erased the city, they also preserved it, sealing jade, pottery, and wooden artifacts beneath layers of silt where they remained untouched for millennia. The artifacts themselves tell a story as haunting as the ruins. Most notable are the jade objects, polished discs, tubes, and masks carved with abstract designs. These were not trinkets of decoration. They were symbols of power. Only the ruling elite were buried with jade, suggesting a society already divided into classes. Some scholars even argue that these carvings represent the earliest attempt at a writing system in East Asia, a language of symbols that has yet to be fully understood. But who were these rulers? Their names are lost, their voices silenced. Yet the clues they left behind whisper of a people who believed in cosmic order. The jade artifacts often align with symbols of heaven and earth, hinting at rituals meant to bind human power with divine authority. This was not just politics, it was theology. The rulers of Liangzhu did not simply govern, they mediated between the earth and the heavens. To imagine the city at its height is to see a place alive with ceremony. Processions moving through canals, farmers offering rice to the temples, rulers draped in jade commanding respect, not just as leaders, but as figures who carried the weight of the cosmos. Liangzhu was a city where power and spirituality fused, creating a society as mysterious as it was advanced. And then, as suddenly as it rose, it was gone. Around 2300 BCE, the city fell silent. The canals dried, the palaces crumbled, and its people vanished into history. But the question remains, was it only the floods that ended Liangzhu, or was there something deeper? A crisis of belief, a rebellion against the rulers who tied themselves to heaven? Or perhaps a shift so subtle it left no trace, except in the silence that followed. As archaeologists sift through mud and stone, they are not just piecing together a lost city. They are confronting the possibility that Liangzhu was not destroyed in a single moment, but through a slow unraveling of faith, environment, and power. A city undone not only by nature, but by the very complexity that made it remarkable. The jade, the walls, the canals, they are not answers. They are questions, frozen in time. And those questions lead us deeper into the enigma of Liangzhu. To understand the riddle of Liangzhu, we must step beyond the walls of the city and look outward, to the rivers, the mountains, and the jade veins that fed its power. Liangzhu was not isolated. Its influence reached far beyond the wetlands, connecting distant landscapes into a web of exchange. The jade that became the emblem of its rulers did not come from the flat riverlands. It was quarried hundreds of miles away in the rugged mountains of eastern China. The very act of transporting such heavy stone across rivers, forests, and plains reveals a society of remarkable organization. Teams of workers, overseen by elites, must have spent months hauling raw jade downriver. Once in the city, master craftsmen transformed it into gleaming discs, squares, and axes that carried both prestige and mystery. But jade was more than a symbol of wealth. It was a spiritual technology. The Liangzhu elite buried themselves with jade bidiscs, circular carvings thought to represent the heavens, and Kong tubes, square artifacts aligned with the earth. Together, these shapes embodied a cosmic balance between sky and soil, spirit and body. To hold jade was not just to wield luxury, it was to touch eternity. What makes this more compelling is that Liangzhu's jade designs do not appear in isolation. Similar symbols would echo centuries later in the Shang and Zhou dynasties. long after Liangzhu itself was forgotten. The motifs outlived the city, as though its spiritual language seeped into the DNA of Chinese civilization. This raises the haunting possibility that Liangzhu was not merely a local culture, but the silent ancestor of China's dynastic tradition. And yet, how could a culture so advanced, so deeply rooted in cosmic symbolism, collapse so completely that even its memory was erased? Archaeological evidence points to cataclysm. In the soil layers above the ruins, scientists discovered thick deposits of clay and silt, remnants of massive flooding. Some researchers suggest that these were not ordinary floods, but the result of a series of monsoon superstorms that battered the Yangtze Basin around 2300 BCE. The rains may have lasted for years, overwhelming the dams, drowning fields, and rendering the city uninhabitable. But if nature delivered the final blow, the cracks may have already been forming. Climate shifts would have strained food supplies. Elites, draped in jade and tied to spiritual authority, may have lost legitimacy as crops failed and waters rose. A people who once believed their rulers could balance heaven and earth may have begun to doubt. And once faith erodes, power collapses. Still, there is something eerie about how thoroughly Liangzhu disappeared. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, where memory of cities persisted in myth, Liangzhu vanished from collective history for millennia. Only the Jades survived, passed down through dynasties as ritual objects stripped of their origin story. The city itself lay buried under mud, forgotten even by those who inherited its symbols. Imagine standing in the wetlands 5,000 years ago, as the waters crept higher each season. Imagine farmers abandoning their fields, families dismantling their homes, and rulers watching as the jade that once connected them to heaven now seemed powerless against the rising flood. Step by step, Liangzhu dissolved, not in fire or conquest, but in the slow, relentless silence of nature reclaiming what man had built. And so we are left with a paradox. Liangzhu, the city that should not have existed in its age, vanished as though it had never been. Yet in the fragments of jade, in the engineering of dams, and in the faint echoes of ritual that shaped later dynasties, its spirit endured. It is as if the city's body died, but its shadow lingered, unseen, yet shaping the centuries to come. But what if there is more to Liangzhu's disappearance than floods and climate? What if the truth lies not only in the mud of the Yangtze, but in the whispers of legend, waiting to be reinterpreted? That is where our journey now turns, toward the stories and theories that surround this lost civilization. For centuries, Liangzhu remained invisible. The wetlands covered its bones, and its name was erased from human memory. When later dynasties wrote their chronicles, they spoke of kings, wars, and rituals, but not of Liangzhu. And yet, beneath their silence, the earth kept its secrets, waiting for the day someone would listen. That day finally came in the early 20th century. Farmers digging in the soil around Hangzhou began unearthing strange objects, delicate discs, square tubes, and ornaments carved from pale green stone. They did not resemble the bronzes of the Shang or the pottery of the Zhou. Instead, they seemed older, more primitive, yet astonishingly refined. Scholars puzzled over these artifacts. Who could have carved such perfect jade with tools of stone and bone? How could a people without metal have achieved such precision? At first, many dismissed the finds as scattered relics, perhaps trinkets of a forgotten tribe. But as more jade emerged, the truth became impossible to ignore. These were not isolated objects. They were the remnants of a civilization. Systematic excavations began in the 1930s, halting during the chaos of war, then resuming decades later with modern methods. What archaeologists uncovered was staggering. Foundations of massive walls, palace platforms, networks of canals, and the unmistakable marks of urban planning. Liangzhu was no village. It was a city, one of the earliest in the world. The discoveries shocked historians. For generations, the narrative of ancient China began with the Shang dynasty around 1600 BCE. But Liangzhu pushed that origin back by more than 1,000 years. It revealed that complex state-level societies had risen in China long before bronze or written records. The textbooks had to be rewritten. Even more startling was the engineering. Excavations revealed dams stretching for miles, carefully layered with stone and earth. Some were as tall as 5 stories, designed to control flooding and channel water into fields. This was not the work of a scattered tribe. It was a coordinated effort involving thousands of laborers under centralized command. Liangzhu's rulers had wielded both technical genius and social power. And then there was the jade. Buried in tombs were not just ornaments, but entire assemblages of symbolic carvings. Kongs etched with mysterious faces, some resembling masks, others abstract, hinted at a spiritual language we still cannot fully translate. Were they gods, ancestors, symbols of authority? Each object seemed less like decoration and more like a coded message from a lost belief system. The deeper archaeologists dug, the clearer the paradox became. Liangzhu had all the hallmarks of a great civilization: wealth, hierarchy, technology, and ritual. But it left behind no written texts, no epic tales, no names of kings. We know its engineering, its art, even its burial practices, but not its voice. The city speaks in Jade, but its language is silence. And yet silence does not mean insignificance. In 2019, UNESCO declared Liangzhu a World Heritage Site, recognizing it as evidence of 5,000 years of Chinese civilization. Suddenly, this forgotten city was not just a curiosity, it was a cornerstone of history. A reminder that advanced societies can rise, fall, and vanish, leaving only faint traces for the future to rediscover. But as much as archaeology explains, it also deepens the mystery. Why did such brilliance collapse so suddenly? Why did later dynasties inherit its symbols but not its memory? And why does Liangzhu, even now, feel like a puzzle half solved, a message half read? Perhaps the next layer of the riddle lies not in stone or soil, but in legend. In the myths of floods, vanished kingdoms, and rulers who lost the mandate of heaven long before the phrase was ever spoken. To understand Liangzhu's fall, we must now step into the world of stories. Long before archaeologists uncovered Liangzhu, stories of great floods rippled through Chinese myth. In texts written centuries after Liangzhu's disappearance, legends spoke of waters that would not recede, of villages swallowed by rivers, and of a hero who rose to tame the chaos. That hero was Yu the Great, the founder of China's semi-mythical Xia dynasty. The tale is simple yet haunting. Endless rains drowned the land, rivers burst their banks, and crops vanished under the weight of unrelenting water. For generations, people fought the floods in vain. Then came Yu, who engineered canals and channels to guide the waters back into the seas, saving the people and earning the divine right to rule. His efforts became the foundation of kingship itself, the mandate of heaven in its earliest form. At first glance, these are only myths, echoes of a cultural memory. Yet modern science has begun to ask, what if the Great Flood was not just a story? Could it have been a distorted remembrance of real events? Events like those that ended Liangzhu? The soil layers around the ruins tell their own version of the story. Archaeologists have found thick deposits of silt and clay laid down by sudden, catastrophic flooding. Radiocarbon dating places these layers around 2300 BCE, the very moment Liangzhu vanished. What is more, climate records show a shift in monsoon patterns around this time, suggesting years of extreme rainfall. It is tempting to imagine that the myth of Yu the Great may have preserved the memory of these disasters, transforming real floods into legendary trials. If this is true, then Liangzhu was not just a city erased by nature. It may have been the prototype for the flood myths that shaped Chinese identity for millennia. Its collapse became the cautionary tale, remembered not in its own name, but in the cultural DNA of later dynasties. Yet myths carry more than history. They carry meaning. Yu the Great did not simply drain the waters. He restored balance between heaven and earth. To the ancients, floods were not just weather events, but signs of cosmic imbalance. Rulers who lost control of nature lost legitimacy. This idea, crystallized centuries later as the mandate of heaven, may have had its unspoken roots in Liangzhu. Think of it, a city of jade and canals, its rulers claiming divine authority, suddenly drowned by floods they could not stop. To survivors and their descendants, this would not have been seen as chance. It would have been seen as judgment. Heaven itself withdrawing its favor. And so, as the people scattered and the wetlands reclaimed the city, the lesson lived on. No ruler holds power forever. Water, sky, and earth answer to no king. But there is another possibility, one even more unsettling. What if Liangzhu's collapse was not only due to floods, but to its very dependence on controlling them? What if the dams, once symbols of mastery, became the instruments of destruction? When structures of control fail, they fail catastrophically. Perhaps Liangzhu engineered its own downfall, leaving behind a warning that would echo through legend. The higher you build, the harder the collapse. This is where Liangzhu's silence grows loudest. Its ruins whisper of engineering brilliance and sudden death. Its jade tells of cosmic belief and vanished rulers, and its myths, though nameless, may have inspired the very foundations of Chinese civilization. But even as myths and archaeology intertwine, a question remains. Why was Liangzhu so completely erased from memory when other ancient cultures lived on in stories and dynastic claims? Could its disappearance have been deliberate? An erasure of a failure too great to remember? Or was it simply the wetlands themselves, burying a city until time forgot? In the next chapter, we will trace how Liangzhu's legacy flickered, hidden in plain sight, through artifacts carried into later dynasties, an invisible thread tying a forgotten city to the heart of China's enduring civilization. Though Liangzhu's name disappeared, its spirit did not. The jade, silent yet indestructible, became its messenger across centuries. When archaeologists opened Shang and Zhou tombs, built more than 1,000 years after Liangzhu's fall, they found familiar shapes, the same discs, the same square tubes, the same motifs of heaven and earth. Yet the Shang and Zhou never knew Liangzhu's rulers, never walked its streets, never saw its dams rise above the wetlands. This creates a haunting image. Liangzhu's symbols survived while the city itself was forgotten. as though its soul scattered into the dynasties that followed. Its rulers vanished, but their vision lingered, shaping the very foundation of Chinese ritual life. It is civilization without a voice, yet with an afterlife that stretched for millennia. And still, Liangzhu remains a riddle. We know it was advanced, but we do not know its names. We know it collapsed, but we cannot say with certainty why. Was it nature's wrath, or the failure of human ambition? Was it remembered through legend as the flood stories of Yu the Great, or erased deliberately as a caution too shameful to tell? Standing in the wetland today, where reeds sway over buried walls and dragonflies skim the water, it is difficult to imagine the city that once thrived here. Yet beneath the soil lie palaces, canals, and the bones of a people who dreamed bigger than their time allowed. Liangzhu was not supposed to exist, and yet it did. That alone makes it extraordinary. But perhaps that is the true lesson of Liangzhu. Civilizations rise not only with stone, metal, and writing, but with ideas. And ideas, whether carried in jade, in myth, or in silence, can survive long after cities have fallen. Liangzhu may have died, but its shadow continued to walk through history, unacknowledged but unforgettable. The vanished city leaves us with questions that may never be answered. Was it a warning from the past about the fragility of human power before nature? Or was it a quiet gift, offering symbols that would carry forward into the dynasties that followed? Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. A city drowned, a memory erased, a voice silenced, yet a legacy carved in stone, still whispering through time. Liangzhu is gone, but the riddle it left behind endures. And in that riddle, we glimpse not only the mystery of a forgotten people, but the reminder that no civilization, no matter how advanced, is eternal. The jade gleams, the waters rise, and the silence speaks.